Making a double crust pie crust today for our apple pie. 2 1/4 cups flour with 3/4 teaspoons salt. I'm going to stir that together prior to adding our shortening because we don't want any of the crust to get a clump of salt. That would not taste so good, would it? All right, I've got that stirred together. And now I'm adding 2/3 cup shortening. It's packed in there. I'm going to go ahead and use a spatula to get it out. Important to get all of your product out because without it, it is not going to hold together correctly. Now we're going to do a process called cutting in. You can cut in with a fork or 2 forks, the old-fashioned way like I grew up, or you can cut in using a pastry cutter. Be careful hanging on with your helper hand. You're trying to make piece-shaped little granules out of your flour and shortening. This does take a little bit of time. Now mine is very sharp as yours is at school. Make sure you're using your rubber spatula to scrape it off periodically, not your fingers. There are ones that are not sharp, however the ones we're using are sharp. Hanging on again with helper hand, carefully getting to pea-sized pieces. We have got our crust nice and light and flaky, and our shortening is all cut in and it's granular and you don't see any large clumps. I'm just proofing it with my fork to make sure that I don't see any more clumps of it. And I actually kind of like a fork better, to be honest, to do this part of it. So if you're like me and a little bit old-fashioned and this just works for you better, you may want to use the fork instead of the pastry cutter. Sometimes newer is not better. Okay, we've got all of our nice little well-blended pieces. And now we're going to add ice water. Ice water helps the crust to stick together better and to roll out easier. So you do want to use ice water. We're going to add our 4 tablespoons of water, ice water initially, 3 and 4. We're going to give it a stir. Keep adding up to 10 tablespoons. I don't know if I said teaspoons, but it's tablespoons. Up to 10 tablespoons, more or less. You always want to start with less initially. You're trying to work in the water and not get too much. If it's too wet, then you got to add more flour, and that gets to be a little bit of a sticky situation. I know. Can you see it, Stanley? Okay, so that was 4, 5, 6. We're trying to create a dough ball. And I'm not trying to use my hands. On pasta, pretzels, etc., you're using your hands. Pie crust, it gets a little bit tough. Trying not to touch it with my hands as much as possible. Each of you is making a double crust, so you will be making this much crust and dividing it into a top layer. So that's 7, and here is 8. I don't know how you can see that. It looks like maybe you're filming the water. Okay. Notice it's starting to get wetter. Working that in. And it will depend on your room temperature, if you've measured your flour exactly. 9 and 10. Keep stirring around, blending that water in. Hanging on with my helper hand. And I do have a really good grip. And of course, as always, you're going to be standing. You don't want to be sitting to do this process because you need your leverage. Cooking and baking is not a sitting activity. Okay, I'm going to just use my hand for a little bit, see if I can work it into a dough ball. And checking that it's not too dry and not too wet. Okay, seems like a pretty good consistency to me. You'll notice that I was able to pick up all of the pieces out of the bowl. I'm going to divide my dough in half and roll out one side of my crust at a time. Sprinkling some flour onto our mat. You'll notice that we have the rings that are going to guide us, and we're placing a little bit of flour so that our dough doesn't stick to that. And I'm pressing it out. I know that people are a little bit more skilled at this would not bother with pressing it out, but this is a little bit better for me. I flipped it over so I have a little bit of flour on the top and the bottom. With your rolling pin, nice pressure. Oopsie. Nice pressure. Sorry, not so aggressive, Mrs. I. All right, so nice pressure back and forth. You'll notice I'm switching directions, trying to keep it in a circular pattern. It doesn't need to be perfect because we will be trimming it, but we do want it to obviously not be a square. As it starts sticking, if you notice it's sticking it off, you can add a little bit more flour if you need to. Okay, we're getting there. Now for the peach pie, you would only be doing just the bottom, but we're going to have a top and bottom for the apple, a double crust. Okay, making sure it's all sealed together. Placing my pie tin on top of the crust. My hand's going to go under my silicone, and my other hand is going on top of the pan, flipping, nice and easy. That's why you don't want too much flour on anything. A little goes a long way. A little dab will do ya. Little dab will do ya. Okay, and then this is where, just need to grab a knife quick. If you want to make a little bit of a pinch to your crust, kind of as you're going around, you can do that, or if you just want it nice and straight, you can cut it off with your butter knife. These make excellent little cookies with, if you bake them in the oven at 400 degrees with a little bit of butter and cinnamon sugar, they come out yummy. Stan, they're one of your favorites, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, now I'm just going to show you the filling, which we've already gotten done. That was one large Granny Smith apple and one of the Cortland, or maybe not Gala, but probably Cortland, Macintosh, Pink Lady. There's quite a few brands, as long as the apple says crisp. You don't want a soggy tart. And notice how we did our filling first, and it's starting to get a little bit, emulsification is happening because of the sugar. All right, we'll do the next crust, and I'll come back to show you how to place it on top. We've got our second layer, top layer of crust done. For this one, we can't go under the mat, so I needed to flour a little bit at the top. Carefully, gently moving that, flipping it back, putting a little bit of flour on. And then as I have it in half, I'm gently carrying it over to my pie. Gonna unfold it. Now with this crust, making sure we're tucking around the pie, that there aren't any holes, and going around the edge so that way when we do trim it again, and this is where you can be a little more artistic with your edge. You could use a fork, you can use your fingers and crimp it, and then make your pie crust marks, which is what I'll complete and finish doing here in a moment. But I wanted to show you too that we need to make some steam holes for it to breathe. You can simply do some slits if you like, because it needs to be able to breathe or it'll explode. Some slits. You could do some other little tiny ones in between. You could be a little bit more fancy and cut out like an apple seed shape if that's what you want, or you can make a star. You just don't want to remove so much that it's no longer a double crust. So if I did one over there, I might do one matching on each side and make it like 4 symmetrical and kind of into that symmetry. But this is where you get to have a little bit of leeway and some unique creativity with your design. And we'll show you it just a minute when it is ready to go in the oven.
Bam.
We're going to apply a little bit of milk to the top of our crust. That will create browning. Who doesn't like a nice brown crisp crust? Without it, you'll do fine, but it won't taste as, or it won't be as appealing without milk. When we do our calzones in the other cooking class, we use an egg wash to make it brown, and then with the soft pretzels, you remember we used, what was it, Stan? It was baking soda and water, and that gave it a crisp crust. So those are some of the secrets and tricks to the trade. All right, we are ready to place it in our oven, and you'll notice that on my pan that I do have parchment, or not parchment paper, so that way if it oozes and leaks, I don't have a mess in my oven. All right, 20 to 25 minutes at 400 degrees.